everybody. I get to say that this time, and there's about 25 people out there that I can welcome. You realize it was 63 days ago when I preached my last sermon to a full audience. And it's not a full audience this time, but it has been over 2 months. It was on March 15, I believe, when I preached on a Sunday morning, and it's good that we are, at least have a few of you here to listen, and I want to thank each of you who are here right now, who have come to worship God and listen as I preach. I want to thank those of you who will be at church tomorrow morning at various times to listen to me preach. That'll be with the recording. And for those of you that are listening at home or with your friends or wherever you are, we want to worship God. This morning I want to spend a little time thinking about some things that Paul wrote to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 4. So if you have your Bibles and want to turn to that passage, I'll be starting reading with verse 6. Now in the first 5 verses of this chapter, we covered those several weeks ago. But in the first 5 verses, Paul reminds Timothy that it's fairly regularly that people depart from the faith. Now, I don't know how regularly, but it's not something that only happens once every 25 years. It's something that happens, and we need to be aware of that. And Paul told Timothy that there are people who come in and deceive followers of God and draw them away from the truth of the gospel. We don't know the specifics of the lies that these people told, but Paul reminded Timothy that there are people there who tell lies that will be drawing people away from the truth of God. The lie that is told in most cases that draw people away from their faith are not a flat-out lie that is something that has no truth to it, but it's usually a lie that is a twisted truth that makes it so that people who are hearing it do not understand the lie that is there. After warning Timothy in the first 5 verses of people departing from the faith, Paul gives him some admonition about how Timothy can be a good servant of Jesus Christ, and how Timothy can help others also learn to be a good servant of Jesus Christ. Let's start reading in verse 6. If you put these things before the brothers, you will be a good servant of Christ Jesus, being trained in the words of the faith and of the good doctrine that you have followed. Have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. Rather, train yourselves for godliness. For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. The saying is trustworthy and deserving of full acceptance. For to this end we toil and strive, because we have our hope set on the living God, who is the Savior of all people, especially of those who believe. Command and teach these things. Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity. Until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, to exhortation, to teaching. Do not neglect the gift you have, which was given you by the prophecy when the council of elders laid their hands on you. Practice these things. Immerse yourselves in them, so that all may see your progress. Keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by so doing you will save both yourselves and your hearers. Paul reminds Timothy, your responsibility as a leader in the church is to proclaim the truth of the gospel. You need to make sure that you are teaching, that what you are teaching and what you are preaching and the example that you are leaving is one that draws people to God and to the truth of the gospel. Paul reminds Timothy, you have been trained. I have taught you a lot of things. You know what the doctrine is. You know what the Christian life is all about. You have everything you need to be a successful minister. So he says, be a servant. Be a servant of Jesus Christ. As you strive to be a servant who leads by example, you will be able to stem the tide of people who are departing from the faith. And I know sometimes as leaders, we wonder what we can do and what we should do. But Paul is reminding Timothy in these verses, he says, you have to be an example. And then he said, one of the ways of being an example is to have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. What's that? You ever wondered what that is? Seems like every translation of the Bible says it in a different way. King James Version says profane and old wives' fables. Evidently, profane and old wives' fables are irreverent, silly myths. Or, the New International Version says godless myths and old wives' fables. The Message says silly stories that get dressed up as religion. The New American Standard says worldly fables fit only for old women. I don't know what old women have to do with it, and why there are certain things that are okay for old women but not for everybody else. I don't know quite where that fits. I really wonder what Paul was telling Timothy, and what were the old wives' fables or the irreverent, silly myths that were around in Timothy and Paul's day. But I don't need to know that. A myth is something that some people think is true, but there is no actual proof. Irreverent is something that draws us away from the worship of God. Profane is something that causes ungodly thoughts and actions. Silly is something that makes little logical sense. So, the things that I believe Paul is telling Timothy to make sure he completely avoids are those things that you can't prove that are true, that draws away from worship of God, that causes us to have ungodly thoughts and actions, and that make little logical sense. Do you know anything like that? Do you think there's anything like that involved in this coronavirus? Now, I don't know if Paul was telling Timothy that he's supposed to examine all these things and figure out whether they are old wives' fables or not, or whether they are silly myths or not, or whether they are, I don't know if Paul was saying, Timothy, you evaluate each one of these and you figure out what it is, and then you let everybody know that it is that way. I don't know if Timothy was smart enough to figure that out for everybody else, but I know Timothy was smart enough to figure that out for himself. In the last 2 months, there have been numerous stories that I have wondered if they were irreverent, silly myths, as the English Standard Version says. I have wondered that. But most of them, I was never able to conclude that that was the case because I couldn't prove whether what they were saying was true or not. You know, most of the things that I was talking with somebody else the other day, and it was like, there are so many stories out there, and there's no way to figure out whether they are true or not. We can hear doctors talking about different things. We can hear other people talking about different things. We can watch videos. Is what that person's saying true? We have no proof of that. None. We don't have any proof about whether or not the Chinese people concocted this virus. Now, you might believe that that's the case, but you have absolutely no proof. There is absolutely no way that you can conclusively prove that. Then that's the way it is with most of these stories. I don't generally try to prove silly myths, things that are silly myths, but there was one thing that I read earlier this week, that I heard earlier this week, that to me falls into the silly stories that are dressed up as religion that we are to avoid. Now, I could be wrong in my judgment, and I could be, and I am not trying to cast any judgment on any who don't agree with me, but the arguments that I heard in regards to this one issue, I believe are provably false. And I couldn't believe my eyes when I read earlier this week about a good godly Mennonite who declared that they would never wear a face mask because in this COVID virus, the face mask does a lot more harm than it does good. And I read that, and I thought, where did that come from? So I continued reading what they had to say. And as I read through the article and read through the comments that were after that, it made me think of, my own personal experience with masks. My dad spent a bunch of his life in very dusty conditions. He farmed, tractors without cab. He worked in construction. He worked in the warehouse. My dad detested wearing masks. He felt like his lungs could clean the air for him well enough, and I don't remember ever seeing him wear a mask. He might have, but I don't remember ever seeing him wear a mask. When he was in his 60s, he started having real problems with his breathing. He would just be real short of breath. He went to the doctor and discovered that he had a condition in his lungs that I think it caused him to lose like a 40% capacity of his breathing. It was very similar to black lung, which is what the coal miners get from breathing the coal dust. And it got to the place where if he wanted to be in dusty conditions, he had to wear a mask that included times an air tank and something to pump the air and something all over his head. It was very, very inconvenient and very hard for him to use, but that's what he had to use if he wanted to be able to work in dusty conditions. And he did that. And I don't know whether wish that he would have worn a mask earlier in his life or not. I don't know that. And the system worked for him. As I watched my father struggle with his lungs and breathing, I wondered, should I wear masks in dusty conditions? I detested wearing masks just as much as my dad did. And my wife would, she at times put pressure on me that I should wear a mask so my lungs didn't become like my dad's lungs did. I wasn't in near as much dust as my dad was because I spent most of my life teaching school and that sort of thing, and I have tried to watch it fairly closely so that when I do my yearly physical, I always check and make sure my lungs are still in good shape, and I still very seldom wear a mask. If I'm in really dusty conditions, sometimes I do, because it is for the good of my health, and there are times when I get far more particles in my lungs than I should. But I have never felt obligated to wear a mask, because wearing a mask would not help. It would help me, but it wouldn't hinder someone else. In this COVID virus pandemic, I have worn a mask one time. About a week ago, I went and visited Costco so I could buy some hearing aid batteries. And before I went, I asked my wife where I could find a mask. And I wore the mask when I went into Costco. And it was not burdensome for me to do that. Was it uncomfortable? Yes. Did I want to do it? Not for my own personal pleasure? No. I don't get personal pleasure out of wearing a mask. Why did I wear a mask? Because there were a couple reasons. Costco expected me to, and the reason Costco wanted me to was so that it would be safer for the other people in the Costco store. And as I thought about all that, I kind of came to the conclusion that I am afraid the conclusion of not wearing a mask because it doesn't do any good was a conclusion that people came to because they were trying to find facts that would support their desire not to wear a mask because it was really uncomfortable. You know, everyone knows, I think, that we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide, right? When I breathe in oxygen so that the oxygen can get in my lungs and can go into my bloodstream so that my body can use the oxygen to burn calories. Is basically the way it works. And then when I breathe out, my body gives off carbon dioxide and I breathe out carbon dioxide. One of the reasons it was given that a mask does more harm than good was that when you have the mask on, it makes it so you can't breathe in the oxygen from the outside, and the carbon dioxide that you're trying to breathe out just gets clustered all in by this mask and makes it so you're actually breathing poison. Now, there was a tiny bit of truth to that and a whole lot of error. First of all, carbon dioxide is not poison. Carbon monoxide is poison. You will not die if you breathe carbon dioxide. You can breathe all the carbon dioxide that you want to, and you will not die. The other thing is, do you know what percentage of oxygen is in the air that you breathe? A little over 20%. Do you know how much carbon dioxide is in the air that you normally breathe? A little under 1%. How about what you breathe out? What you breathe out, there is 16.5% oxygen and 4.5% carbon dioxide. So, what you breathe out has a little bit more carbon dioxide in it. But there is absolutely nothing to where you're breathing through a mask is going to make you die or even make you uncomfortable, because you're breathing a tiny bit more carbon dioxide into your lungs than you normally would. And that's given as a pretty big fact at why these masks were just bad news. The masks that we are expected to wear are not the ones that form around your face in a way that seals them off, so all the air that you breathe comes in through the mask. Because of that, the masks that we are expected to wear, the reason we can't wear those other ones is because there's a shortage of them and only the medical people can wear those. But because of that, that means if we're in an area where there is some COVID virus, it's not going to keep me from getting the COVID virus. Everybody knows that, or that's what we have been told. And that means that wearing a mask is not to protect myself. Do you know why we wear a mask? There is a certain percentage of the people who get the COVID virus who have no symptoms, but they have it. And when they cough and when they breathe out, little tiny microscopic droplets of water will have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 COVID virus on that. That goes out into the air, and then if somebody else breathes that in, then they are exposed to that COVID virus. And even people who don't have symptoms can do that. The COVID virus is extremely small. The cloth mask that we wear will not capture a COVID virus, but it will capture most, one place I read said 95% of the water droplets that are exposed when we breathe and when we cough will be contained in the mask. And as soon as the water droplet gets attached to the mask, then that COVID virus gets attached to the mask and it won't go out to the other people. So the reason we wear a mask is so that in case we have it, though we're not showing any symptoms, we don't expose other people. The reason I had no problem wearing a mask when I went to Costco was because I wanted to assure those people that I was concerned about their health. I'm convinced I don't have COVID virus. But those other people don't know me from Adam. And if I go to a place where either the government is telling me that I have to wear a mask, or the store is telling me I have to wear a mask, what do you think the people in there will think if I refuse to wear a mask? What do you think those people that don't know me will think about those people's health? They will think that I have not a care in the world about whether or not they get COVID virus. They probably feel disrespected by me. Now, does that mean that I have disrespect in my heart for them and that I don't worry about them? Not necessarily. I'm not going to accuse people who refuse to wear masks. I'm not going to accuse them of disrespecting other people, because I don't know. But I do know that the people who don't know them, that's what they will pursue. That's what they will, that is the impression that they will get. And I think it is wrong for any of us as Christians to give off that impression, even if it's not what's in our heart. And that we need to make sure that we do what we can not to give that impression off. And it didn't help people. Didn't the first health people say that masks are no good? That was another excuse that they used. Why did they say they're no good? And now they say we have to wear them, or that we should wear them. Did you ever say anything that you thought was true, and then you got more evidence, and then you decided and changed your mind? Did you ever do that? I think we can give the health people the privilege of doing that too. When the health organizations were first saying in this that wearing masks isn't necessary, that was before they understood very much about what this virus is. I could go on and on talking about this, but I think it's time that I quit. But I think we need to be real careful that what Paul said here was, he was telling Timothy, he said, you need to avoid silly myths. A mask will not completely protect you from COVID virus. You can't say, I'm wearing a mask so I can do all of these other things. But it is false, from my estimation, to say wearing a mask will do absolutely no good. And I believe it is wrong for us as Christians to vociferously refuse to wear masks in areas where people are going to feel like we have no concern about them and their health. And I don't care if you don't agree with me on what I have to say about masks. I don't care about that. I don't care if you feel like masks are totally unnecessary and they are the stupidest thing that anybody could have concocted. You have the privilege of coming to that conclusion. But as a Christian, you don't have the privilege of an ungodly person feeling like you have no care for them. And if they come to that conclusion, even if that's not what's in your heart, if you are giving them that impression, I believe you are doing something that as a Christian you shouldn't do. I need to move on. I wasn't expecting to spend that much time on silly myths. After Paul told Timothy, avoid these silly myths, then he said, rather train yourself for godliness. How do you do that? How do we train ourselves for godliness? Why did the Apostle Paul want Timothy to train himself for godliness? I think what Paul is telling Timothy is, there's going to come things up in your life where you're not going to have necessarily a godly response. I don't like to wear masks. And I have always been that way. And when it was first started saying, well, we need to wear masks because of this coronavirus, I didn't let anybody know. In fact, this is pretty well the first that I have talked to anybody about masks, by the way. I haven't even talked with much about them to my family. I have just a little bit. But I thought, what was the use? And pretty well the only reason that I personally have come to the place where I'm willing to wear one is because of the effect that it will have on others. And I think that is an area in which we need to train ourselves for godliness. Paul then tells Timothy, bodily exercise. Where is it here? Bodily exercise, bodily training is of some value. Godliness is of value in every way.